Since the UFC's featherweight division was created on October 28, 2010, it's had 5 different champions: Jose Aldo, Conor McGregor, Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski, Ilia Topuria, and now again the reigning champion, Alexander Volkanovski. It's a division that's pretty much always been ruled by dominance and long reigns, which is why there's been so many debates over the years about who the real king of the featherweights is. Because the belt hasn't changed hands often, and when it has, it's always marked the start of a new era, it makes the featherweight division one of the most prestigious divisions in the UFC. Today I'm going to go through each champion's respective era and explain who I think is the featherweight GOAT and the reasoning to that. We can't really have a featherweight GOAT debate without mentioning the ones who came before. The WEC plays a huge role in the very same conversation we're having today, and it's part of the reason of why the featherweight division in the UFC exists. On October 18, 2002, WEC 5 would take place at the Tachi Palace Hotel and Casino, where it would be headlined by Cole Escovedo and Philip Perez for the vacant WEC Featherweight Championship. In a fight that would only last a round, Cole Escovedo would stun Philip Perez twice before being taken down by Philip Perez. Cole Escovedo would then go on to lock a triangle choke, submitting Philip Perez to become the first ever WEC Featherweight Champion. He would make his first title defense against Anthony Hamlet at WEC 8, knocking him out in the second round. Cole Escovedo would then lose his WEC Featherweight title against Uriah Faber by doctor stoppage in the second round. Uriah Faber would make his first title defense at WEC 25, where he defeated Joe Pearson by submission to strikes in the very first round. He would then go on to defeat Dominic Cruz, Chance Farrar, Jeff Curran, and making his last title defense against Chaz Pulver, winning by unanimous decision before eventually losing his title to Mike Brown. Mike Brown would make his first title defense at WEC 39, defeating Leonardo Garcia in the first round by an arm triangle choke. He would then go on to defend his title the second time against Uriah Faber, dominating him over 5 rounds to a unanimous decision win. At WEC 44, Jose Aldo would capture the WEC Featherweight Championship from Mike Brown after finishing him in the second round by TKO. He would then go on to defend against Uriah Faber, dominating him over 5 rounds to a unanimous decision win. He would make his last title defense against Manny Gambarian, knocking him out in the second round. Following the UFC-WEC merger, Aldo was promoted to UFC Featherweight Champion on November 20th, 2010. And that will mark the end for the WEC chapter. At UFC 314, Alexander Volkanovski would recapture the featherweight title after defeating Diego Lopez by unanimous decision, which would spark many opinions online about who is the featherweight GOAT, some of which include the opinion of a legend of the sport, Daniel Cormier.
I thought he was the featherweight GOAT before the fight. This only furthers that thought. I think that a guy that can beat Aldo, beat Max Holloway, beat the rest of the guys that he's beaten, challenge Islam in the way that he did in fight number 1, hands down is one of the greatest fighters of all time. And Saturday was just a reminder that if he's not in there with all world killers, he's going to win. This is all he's done.
Other opinion from fans surfaced online such as, after that performance, he's now the greatest featherweight of all time, and it's not even close. He was already the featherweight GOAT. Aldo's best wins are Frankie twice, Chad Mendes twice, and he got dominated by Conor, Max twice, and Volk. Ilia Topuria is the featherweight GOAT. Who gives a shit about his defenses when he ran through the division? Ilia Topuria is the featherweight GOAT. Beating Volk and Max in the ways that he did is better than Volk, Max, and Aldo entire resume. And then obviously you have your odd opinions such as everyone is the GOAT until Zabit steps in. All these different opinions just tell me one thing: most people, even guys like Daniel Cormier, don't actually know what criteria they're using to rank the featherweight grades. Some value dominance, some value performance, others just care about knockout. It all depends on the person, you know? And that's why we get stuck in these endless debates. No one agrees on what we're actually measuring. For me personally, I've got 3 clear criteria, and honestly, I think it's really hard to argue against these. First off, I have the pound for pound. Were they ranked among the best fighters in the world, regardless of weight? Could they have jumped up or down a division and still dominated? Second, the title defenses, which is pretty straightforward. Did they rule as champion or just have a one-off title win with maybe a single defense? And last, it's the quality of opponent. This one can get a bit controversial because it crosses 3 generations of fighters, but basically, Did these champs beat guys who were top 5 or top 10 killers, or were they just mostly fighting guys hanging at the edge of the top 15? In a tableau published in 2019 by Ryan Soros, created in 2013, the UFC pound for pound ranking ranked the top 15 fighters on the UFC roster regardless of weight class. Since 2013, just 5 fighters have been ranked as the pound for pound number 1. The weekly ranking of these fighters and all other fighters to be included in the pound for pound list are shown below. Note, ranking were expanded from 10 to 15 fighters in 2014. Jose Aldo would debut on the pound for pound list at number 4 on February 13, 2013 after defeating Frankie Edgar, and he'd fluctuate in the rankings until May 27, 2015, where he would be ranked the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. He would hold the mantle of pound for pound king from May all the way up until December 13th, where he would eventually lose to Conor McGregor in 13 seconds and be sent down to 7th place, making his reign at the top a total of 201 days as the pound for pound best fighter in the world. Jose Aldo would be last seen on the pound for pound list on November 29, 2017 at rank 14, before his final featherweight fight against Jeremy Stephens and his eventual move to bantamweight, where he would go on to face against Marlon Moraes. Conor McGregor would debut on the pound for pound list as number 13 on August 5th of 2015. He would rise up a single spot on December 9, and after the knockout of pound for pound king Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, he would soar up the rankings to number 3 on December 30th. However, Conor would never clinch the number 1 pound for pound fighter as a featherweight, and as a result, he would be last placed at number 3 in a short-lived but electric featherweight career as he would move on to pursue other avenues. Max Holloway is one of the more interesting ones on this list because he has lasted in the pound for pound ranking more than anyone on this list possibly that I can even think of. Now, I need you to bear with me because this is going to be a bit long. On December 21st of 2016, he would make his pound for pound debut at 10 following his interim featherweight championship bout with Anthony Pettis. He would then rise up to number 5 on June 7th of 2017 after unifying the belts and beating Jose Aldo the first time. He would rise to number 3 on November 8, 2017 after beating Aldo the second time, and ever since then he would fluctuate between the top 10 until he fell to 12 after his loss to Alexander Volkanovski the first time. He would be back up in the top 10 in June of 2020, and he would leave the pound for pound in the 22nd of November of the very same year. He would continue the cycle of coming back and leaving the pound for pound list again until his last ever appearance on the pound for pound as a featherweight, where he was ranked 12. At the time of recording, which would be the July 15th of 2025, he currently sits at 11 as a lightweight fighter, and he is scheduled to face Dustin Poirier at UFC 317. Unfortunately, Max Holloway is probably the guy that has lasted the longest in the pound for pound list, as he has been on it since 2016. With some years, he might have been on and off for a duration of a few months, but he's always been a consistent name on the pound for pound list. However, he would fail to be the pound for pound greatest fighter in the world as a featherweight, which in my opinion hinders him in the featherweight GOAT debate. Alexander Volkanovski first cracked the pound for pound rankings at number 9 in December of 2019 after beating Max Holloway for the second time. By January 2020, he moved up to 8 and continued his rise, breaking in the top 5 at number 4 after his victory over Brian Ortega at UFC 266. In July of 2022, after beating Holloway for the third time, he climbed to number 2. Then in August, following Kamaru Usman's shocking loss to Leon Edwards at UFC 278, Volk officially became the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. He held on to that spot even after a close loss to Islam Makhachev at UFC 284 in February of 2023. And by July, he was tied with John Jones for the number 1 spot, which I thought was bullshit, as seeming John was whatever. Volkanovski eventually lost the top rank after his second loss to Islam in October 2023 at UFC 294, which brought his total time as the number 1 pound for pound fighter to 64 days. To me, personally, being he is the only one, aside from Aldo, on the list being able to achieve the number 1 pound for pound greatest fighter in the world makes him a very strong contender in the featherweight GOAT debate. Topuria's pound for pound run at featherweight has been extremely fast and honestly pretty short when you look at it from the perspective of his time at 145. He first appeared at number 5 on the pound for pound list on February 19, 2024 after knocking out Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 298 to capture the UFC featherweight championship, and by October 27 of the same year, he moved up to number 4 in the pound for pound ranking after beating Max Holloway at UFC 308 by knocking him out. Right now, at the time I'm recording this, he actually sits as the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. But that only happened after he stopped Charles Oliveira in dominant fashion at UFC 317 by knocking him out in the first round. Honestly, I really thought if anyone other than Aldo and Volk was going to end this debate for good, it would be Topuria. He had everything going for him: youth, power, a super high ceiling skill-wise, and he seemed unbeatable. Knocking out both Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski back-to-back, two guys with their own legit claims to being the featherweight GOAT, should have set him up perfectly to take that throne. But unfortunately, the weight cut to 145 proved to be too much, and he had to move up to the lightweight division, where he's now both the lightweight champion and the current #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. Aldo's first UFC title defense was against Mark Hominick in Toronto, in a fight where Aldo would show his technical prowess over 4 rounds with the exception of the 5th, where Mark Hominick mounted Aldo and landed some punches that would give the champ a scare. But overall, he would come out victorious with a unanimous decision win, marking this their first title defense in Aldo's reign of terror. His second title defense would come against a UFC alumni, Kenny Florian. Florian came in quick, looking to grind Aldo in the clinch and take him down, but Aldo did what Aldo did best: not land on the ground. By the 3rd round, Kenny would start to fade and Aldo would take over, dominate as he usually does, and taking home the title in a unanimous decision win. His third title defense was against undefeated Team Alpha Male prospect Chad Mendes. This fight was in Aldo's backyard, and he would do anything to not lose in Rio. In the first round, he displayed fantastic takedown defense by grabbing the cage, and off the clinch he would quickly turn around and knee Mendes in the head as he predicted a takedown before running off to the crowd and celebrating. His fourth title defense would be against Frankie "The Answer" Edgar, the former lightweight champion. It was a back and forth fight where Aldo would score a unanimous decision win over The Answer. His fifth title defense came against Korean Zombie in a fight that would eventually cause him to stop throwing leg kicks down in his career after breaking his foot. Korean Zombie would dislocate his shoulder in the 4th round, and Aldo would kick him on the same dislocated shoulder and finish him to make the 5th title defense. His 6th title defense came at the expense of Ricardo Lamas, who was on a big run at the time. Aldo, in usual Aldo fashion, dominated over 4 rounds and coasted the 5th to win a unanimous decision. Considered by many as one of the greatest title fights ever, this fight showed just how much Mendes has improved since their first meeting. Mendes even dropped Aldo briefly, but Aldo responded right back by dropping him too. It was a wild back and forth where Aldo's championship experience and composure ultimately made the difference. He won by unanimous decision, and he would bring his tally up to 7 title defenses. Connor's 13-second KO of Aldo is one of the most legendary moments ever, but he never defended the featherweight belt. Right after, he moved up to chase the lightweight title and was stripped for not defending. So while his win was historic, his actual reign at 145 was super short. 1 fight, no defenses. After winning the belt by stopping Aldo the first time at UFC 212, Max gave Aldo an immediate rematch. Aldo looked sharper early, landing hard shots to the body, but by the 3rd round, Max's relentless pace took over again. Holloway poured on volume and finished Aldo with ground and pound in the 3rd, cementing that the first fight wasn't a fluke. Max Holloway's second defense came against Brian Ortega. Ortega came in undefeated and known for his submissions and improving striking. The fight was so bad that Max midway started teaching him how to block punches. In typical Brian Ortega fight fashion, Max would put on one of the greatest striking clinics ever, landing over 300 significant strikes, which was a UFC record at the time. Ortega's face was shattered by the 4th, forcing the doctor to stop it before the 5th. Max Holloway's 3rd title defense came against Frankie Edgar. Max kept him at range with his jab, combos, and footwork. Frankie got a few takedowns but couldn't hold him. Overall, Max won a clear decision, showing his ability to control a veteran by outstriking and outpacing him, which would bring his total tally as featherweight champion to 3 title defenses. He would then go on to lose to Alexander Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski's first title defense was a rematch against Max Holloway, who he had already beaten by decision to win the belt. In the first round, Alexander Volkanovski was dropped by Max Holloway with a head kick, and in the second, he was dropped by uppercut and left hook as he was coming in. So far, it looked like Max was on his way to regain his belt until the 3rd round came in and Volkanovski settled into the fight. He would disrupt Max Holloway by leg kicks, jab, clinches, and takedowns. He would then go on to secure the last 3 rounds and a split decision win in a fight where many thought Max had won. He would then go on to defend the title against Brian Ortega. Now, this is more of the usual of what you expect from a Brian Ortega fight. Volk was dominating until the third round came, where he pushed Volkanovski down and secured the top mount to lock in a guillotine, which to be honest looked to be pretty tight, but the champion would break out of the guillotine and would go on to dominate Ortega and secure a very needed unanimous decision win following his controversial win over Max Holloway. His third title defense came against late replacement Korean Zombie after Max was forced out due to injury. This was basically a showcase for Volkanovski's striking levels. He was too fast, too sharp, and too accurate. And by the fourth round, after a brutal series of combos, Herb Dean stepped in to stop the fight due to TKO. It just showed how far ahead Volkanovski was compared to the rest of the division, and it felt like a premonition for the third Holloway fight. Their trilogy fight ended all debates. Volkanovski put on arguably his best performance ever, completely shutting down Max's offense. He beat him at his own game. He outboxed him, he outjabbed him, and made it clear there was no controversy. But in fact, he was just simply better. He won a dominant unanimous decision, solidifying his place over Max historically. His fifth and last defense of the featherweight title was against Yair Rodriguez, who came in as the interim champ with unpredictable kicks and big momentum. Volkanovski closed the distance and landed a beautiful right hook on Yair. He would then go on to use takedowns and heavy top control to wear him out. He then finished him with ground and pound in the third round. It was another statement that no one else at 145 was even close to taking the title off Volkanovski. However, he would get knocked out by Ilia Topuria at UFC 298 to lose his title, which would bring his total tally to 5 title defenses. Topuria's first title defense came against none other than Max Holloway. From the opening bell, Ilia pressured Max, cutting off the cage and throwing heavy counters whenever Max tried to build up his usual pace. Max still landed clean shots, but Topuria's power made Max fight more hesitantly. In the third round, Topuria found his moment. He cracked Max with a heavy straight that would send him stumbling. He would then throw a perfect right hook, dropping Max and becoming the first person to ever knock out Max Holloway. This would be a fantastic start to Topuria's reign. Unfortunately, he would then vacate the title and move up to lightweight, where he currently sits as champion. He had a singular defense as a featherweight champion. Now, due to the rankings being published in 2013, there was no official top 10 or top 5 rankings when Jose Aldo faced off against Mark Hominick. However, according to Fight Matrix, they were able to use Sherdog to rank each fighter in their own respective division, and at the time that Jose Aldo made his first title defense against him, he would be ranked the number 9 featherweight in the world, and he achieved that position by going on a 5-fight win streak. When Aldo defended his title against Kenny Florian, Florian was coming down from lightweight, where he had already 2 failed shots at the belt. At featherweight, he made a successful debut by beating Diego Nunes, which set him up for another title run. By the time he was scheduled to face Aldo, he was actually ranked number 2 in the division, making him a legitimate top contender for the belt. At the time Aldo was set to defend his featherweight title against Chad Mendes for the first time, Mendes was viewed as one of the top featherweights in the world. Depending on which rankings you looked at back then, he was anywhere from 5 on sites like Sherdog and Fight Matrix to even 2 on outlets like MMA Media and Bloody Elbow. I went with Sherdog and Fight Matrix rankings here because they relied more on analytics and statistical algorithms, giving a more objective picture of where Mendes stood. Either way, he was seen as an undefeated powerhouse and widely seen as one of the biggest threats to Aldo's reign. When Aldo defended his title against Frankie Edgar, Edgar was coming down from lightweight, where he'd already been a champion and fought in multiple title fights. He dropped straight into a featherweight title shot without any warm-up fight in the division, and at the time, he was ranked number 2. In February of 2013, the UFC had officially published their rankings for each division, and before Korean Zombie was set to face off against Aldo for the featherweight belt, he was ranked at number 5 by defeating Leonardo Garcia. Yes, the same Leonardo Garcia that lost against Mike Brown in his first defense in the WEC. His other notable wins were Dustin Poirier and former featherweight title challenger Mark Hominick. When Aldo defended his title for the 6th time against Ricardo Lamas was ranked number 2 on the featherweight rankings. He had notable wins on his record like Cobb Swanson and Eric Koch. Before fighting for Aldo's belt the 2nd time, Chad Mendes was ranked as the number 1 contender at the time, a ranking he would secure after going on a 5-fight win streak, taking out names like Darren Elkins, Clay Guida, and Nick Lentz. After going through Jose Aldo's resume, it's clear that he consistently fought the very best in his division. Every single one of his title defenses was against a top 5 opponent, with the lowest ranked challenger being number 9 Mark Hominick. There's a narrative today that the quality of opponent from 2010-2014 doesn't match what we see in 2025, but I find that hard to accept. I genuinely believe that the same Chad Mendes who fought Aldo in their 2nd fight would have no problem taking out fighters like Yair Rodriguez or Brian Ortega. Aside from beating Jose Aldo, there is no use of talking about Conor McGregor in this section, because again, he pursued other avenues aside from fighting.
Proper 12. Proper Irish whiskey from a proper Irish animal.
Holloway's reign might have been short with just 3 title defenses, but it was impressive nonetheless. At the time, Aldo was still ranked number 1, even after his 13-second loss to Conor. He had bounced back by defeating Frankie Edgar again to reclaim the belt. Max would go on to face Brian Ortega, who was ranked number 1 at the time. Ortega was no joke. He was undefeated, riding an impressive streak with wins over Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, Clay Guido, and Renato Moicano. He was seen as a legitimate threat to Max's reign, but as we've come to see, in big fights, Ortega tends to have one huge moment before getting a lesson in boxing mid-fight. Still, regardless of how he performs under the brightest lights, back then he was unbeaten and looked unstoppable, making him a serious test for Max. Max would go on to face Frankie Edgar in what honestly seemed one of the easiest fights in Max's career. Frankie was actually ranked number 4 at the time thanks to wins over Yair Rodriguez and Cub Swanson. And at this rate, it seems like if you win over Cub Swanson, you get a free shot at the title. However, Frankie had actually lost to Ortega before getting this fight, but ended up facing Max right after. Max Holloway's resume is not a fault of his. Sure, he did not fight the best of the world at the time, but as a champion, he fought whoever was put in front of him. The last step being the veteran Frankie, Brian Ortega, and the most notable win of his reign would be against the old king of the featherweights, Jose Aldo. His quality of opponent in comparison to Volkan Aldo does seem a bit lackluster, but to no fault of his own. Alexander Volkanovski would make his first title defense against the number 1 ranked featherweight in the world, Max Holloway. And I mean, what better way to start your reign but to take out the old king? In a fight that would be controversial, Volk got the job done against the number 1 ranked featherweight in the world. He would then go on to face the number 2 ranked featherweight at the time, Brian Ortega. He dominated Ortega even though he was in trouble at some point in the fight, but overall he made easy work of Ortega from bell to bell. Due to Max's injury, the number 4 ranked featherweight Korean Zombie would step in and save the main event of UFC 237. This was honestly sad to watch as he punished Korean Zombie from bell to bell. He would then go on to face Max Holloway for the 3rd time, which you guessed it, he was ranked number 1 at the time, and ending all talks of the second fight being a fluke win. He would then face the number 1 ranked Yair Rodriguez, who was also the interim champion at the time. Volkanovski would make quick work of him and take him out in the 3rd round. Throughout his resume, he has beaten Max Holloway 2 separate times as champion, in addition to Ortega, Yair, and Zombie. If anyone can speak to Aldo or Max in this debate, it's Volk. He's the only one on this list with a resume as strong as Aldo. Most of his wins are against top 5 and top 10 contenders, and he defeated arguably the greatest featherweight of all time. And I know at the time of this recording he won the featherweight championship from Diego Lopez, but this debate is about the greatest featherweight of all time. And for me to count your quality of opponents, I'm doing so with you as champion. Who did you defend against? Were they top 10, top 5 even? So as far as resume of a champion goes, Volkanovski is up there with Max and Aldo. Ilia Topuria would make his first and last title defense against Max Holloway, who was actually ranked number 2 at the time, following Alexander's defeat to Ilia Topuria at UFC 298. And obviously we all know how this one goes, power and precision beats speed and volume. What more can I say about Topuria that I haven't already said in the pound for pound section? In his featherweight chapter, he had everything on his side. He already built a legacy by knocking out 2 featherweight greats back to back, but he's currently lightweight champion with his featherweight chapter coming to an end following his win over Max Holloway. Is it Jose Aldo? Is it Conor McGregor? Is it Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski, or Ilia Topuria? I think the choice is pretty easy for me, to be honest. Could you imagine? But no, I personally think it's Aldo. First of all, having 7 title defenses is insane. 9 if you count the WEC, which I think you should because the creation of the division came from the WEC. It's the exact same division, so what really changed? But I get it. Different organizations and we don't recognize anything that isn't labeled the UFC. However, 7 title defenses is crazy. 201 days as the best fighter in the world, not the best featherweight in the world because he was already that for over a decade, but as the greatest fighter in the world, meaning he could have gone up to lightweight, defeated Frankie Edgar and captured the 2nd belt. And as for his quality of opponent, which is what a lot of people use against Aldo in these debates, beating Chad Mendes twice, Florian, Edgar, Zombie, Lamas, all of these guys were coming off of wins. And some of them were even coming off huge win streaks. And I have no doubt in my mind that these names could come in today and defeat someone like a Brian Ortega or a Yair Rodriguez. Because as much as I understand that the sport has evolved, you should ask yourself if the same Chad Mendes that fought Aldo the 2nd time fought Ortega or Yair today, What would they have done to stop him? However, I do have to mention that Volkanovski is very close to taking off Aldo. I do think that all Volk is missing is a Movsar Evloev. He was originally scheduled to fight Aaron Pico but pulled out due to injury. However, I do believe if you can get someone like Movsar as a ruby on his belt, a contender with a wrestling heavy base, on a tear, and he already beat the former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling, it would be very hard to deny Alexander Volkanovski the featherweight GOAT status. Anyways, that was me. I hope you enjoyed. See you.
Yes, sir. It's like 12 degrees in a trespass coat. Face ID broke, can't get into my mobile phone. I don't know the 4-digit code. I'm in the pub with a J2O with random blokes. I lie to them just unprovoked. Say I'm the face of British Vogue. They're asking me if I really smoke. I'll take a toke, took one